You want to take the next step in homesteading. Maybe you've raised a couple of feeder piglets and you've got some good pork in your freezer. You're thinking to yourself, well, these piglets are kind of expensive when you get a couple of them. And next year I want to sell a few. And you start adding up some of those costs of inputs. And you're thinking, maybe I should start breeding my own. Cut out the middleman, have a little bit more control, save some money. Seems like a good idea, right? In this video, I want to tell you 9 reasons why I am begging you, please do not start breeding piglets. I'm Stephen Riker, and this is Rowan Ridge Farm. We are raising heritage hogs on pasture the old-fashioned way. I've been breeding and butchering here for the last 4 years, and I am new enough to the game where I am still making mistakes, so that gives me plenty of things to make videos about. And my mission is to make America farmers again, because it's a battle for the hearts and minds of America, and it runs right through your backyard and your living room. So let's take this journey together. You absolutely should not be breeding piglets because you think it is going to save you money or make you money quickly. The financial benefits of breeding are slim to none, especially in the short term. There may be some benefits down the road if you are able to make it far enough into the process and to develop a good enough breeding program that is robust and beneficial, and you gain some credibility and some name recognition within your community. But in terms of just saving money in the short term, it absolutely is not there, because breeding pigs is expensive. Number one, good genetics cost money. Please do not get involved in breeding piglets if you don't want to invest money in good quality genetics. One of the later videos in this series that I am making all about breeding pigs. It is a deep dive, and we're going to have a handful of videos, at least 5 or 6. We're really going to go into the weeds on breeding. And one of the videos I'm going to do is going to talk specifically about genetics, but the reality is good genetics are developed over time. The time that is put in adds up to money, which means that if you're buying cheap pigs, you're probably getting cheaper and much less refined genetics. It's worth the money to get good genetics. And if you're just buying cheap genetics, you're going to be missing out a lot on quality. And that's something that you're going to be ultimately passing on to your customers, whether you or they are aware of it or not. There's a lot of labor involved, and time is money. And so when you're having to keep breeding animals throughout the entire year, feeder pigs, you have them 6, 7, 8 months, you send them to the freezer, and then they're off your feed bill. Breeding animals, you have to keep for an entire year, and you're managing them through the worst parts of your weather in whatever region of the country you're in. Now, I'm in New England. Winters here are quite rough, and as it turns out, pigs are very tolerant to cold, but there's a lot of people who avoid breeding pigs in the first place because they don't want to have to take their pigs through a New England winter. And that's a reasonable concern, because it's a lot different feeding pigs in the summertime when you throw on a pair of Crocs and you go outside and dump a bucket over the fence and have a nice day, versus when you have to go into the barn fully suited and booted in bib overalls and many layers to go in there and then smash up the waterers because they're all frozen, and take a blowtorch and try to heat the nipple drinker so that you can get the water running again. These are all considerations that you wouldn't have if you're just doing feeder piglets. And it's something that you need to be aware of before you jump off the deep end into breeding pigs. Please do not get into breeding pigs if you have other animals on your homestead or your farm that are demanding, or that are going to be having babies, or that require a substantial amount of management. The reality is that farrowing, when the pigs give birth, and the whole process leading up to that point, requires a lot of time and management, both medically speaking, giving some vaccination, checking up, making sure the right rations are available, not too much, not too little, and that the health is maintained throughout the gestational process. And then, of course, once the babies arrive, making sure that they have the protection and the resources that they need. And it takes a lot more time than you might think, because when mama's giving birth and you have to be out there all night because you want to make sure that she doesn't get agitated and step on the babies, or if she has stuck piglets and you can't get them out and she can't get them out by herself and you have to glove up to the shoulder and you have to reach in and pull piglets, these are things that take a substantial amount of time. Making sure that all the needs, the sanitation, that all of these things are being maintained throughout the entire year. If you have a baseline level of effort that's already substantial, adding a breeding pair of animals is not just the two animals, it's actually effectively adding far more than just two animals, because you're going to be having all the babies to deal with. The animals, once they're giving birth, are much more vulnerable, medically speaking. And so you potentially have the opportunity to be putting in a lot more time, exponentially more than what you might think, based on the fact that, oh, it's just a couple extra pigs. Not so fast. You don't want to breed pigs if you are not comfortable dealing with emotionally stressful situations. Putting it in very direct terms, I've had to take baby piglets that have just been born, that are precious life, that's just come into the world on your farm. They've been injured, they're suffering, they've been stepped on, have to take them outside, put a 22 to their head, and end their life and put them out of their suffering. There is nothing about that that gets easier every time that that happens. It's very difficult when you're dealing with mama who's in there with her babies as she's giving birth. If she's agitated or uncomfortable, or it's her first time giving birth and you don't know exactly how she's going to react, and maybe she doesn't like you being so close, but you want to be close enough that you can help if she needs it. And so you're trying to figure out where to go, and she gets up and she's turning around and stomping around, and her babies are sitting there just newly born, right? So they can't get up and run out of the way. They're kind of flopping around without much ability to protect themselves. And you have to sit there and not go in closer, because you're just going to upset mama, and she's going to have more risk or more likelihood of stepping on the babies. And you have to be able to just hold your peace and stand back, let mama do her own thing. And the reality is that sometimes she steps on her babies, and you have to watch that, and you can't help and you can't make it better. There's emotionally stressful things like that are a big part of the breeding process. Watching the mamas eat their babies, sometimes it happens. You cull for breeders that have bad disposition or that don't handle their babies well, but it's really stressful. I've been involved with, in only 4 years of doing this, I've had to reach inside mamas and pull piglets. When you're doing that, that also means that you're going to be given at least 3 days of antibiotics afterwards because of the infection risks. I've had farrowing situations where all the babies died. Either they were stillborn or they were just inadequately cared for, and mama rolled on them and stepped on them, and they all went the way of the buffalo. I've had situations where the mama dies and the babies die, and you're out the money, you're out the time, and it's heartbreaking. And then on top of it, it's the middle of the winter, and you've got animals that you have to bury and you have to get out of the way, because guess what? The other 10 animals that you have, they also need to be fed and watered, and they didn't stop having needs because you had a breeding pair that had stuff going on and babies coming into town. You have to be able to deal with all of it, put it in stride, and keep it moving. You have to be able to detach from the situation, assess what needs to be done, and let it happen. And death is part of life. It's beautiful bringing life onto the farm. Dealing with death and suffering is part of breeding and bringing life onto the farm. It's not for the faint of heart. If you don't have access to veterinary care in your area, somebody who will specifically deal with pigs, there are a lot of large animal vets that only deal with cows, or they only deal with horses because there are more dairy farms and horses are very profitable. There's obviously tons of small animal vets, but getting a vet to come out and see pigs specifically, that can be challenging. And thanks to regulations passed by the FDA in 2023, you're not able to go to Tractor Supply and just buy a bottle of penicillin to give to your mother who's farrowing, when you had to reach inside her and pull piglets out because you want to manage any infection risks after the procedure has been completed. You're not able to just do that on your own. You have to have a script from a vet that enables you to do that. And without having that, the mother is going to be at substantial amount of risk. And then there are other things, the babies can get sick. You can have greasy pig, which is something that develops relatively easy from the babies. They have like a staph infection. They have the germs in their mouth and they're biting at each other and kind of nipping at each other where they're fighting over the tip. And then they'll get this infection that's scabby and scaly, and they need penicillin and a little scrub with some iodine to get rid of that. But again, in order to get access to those antibiotics, you better have a vet standing by who can come out and see your animals, has a relationship with you. Ideally, I would say you want to develop a relationship with vet when you're starting the process of breeding, so that by the time farrowing comes around and the mama is ready to give birth, you have access to medical care that will be enough to get you through that process. But if you don't have any access to it, you don't have any medical care and ability, that's going to be something that could be a significant impediment that you're not going to really realize until they're in the middle of giving birth and all of a sudden you have to do something a little bit out of the ordinary. There's no more babies coming out, but you know mama still has babies because you haven't seen both placentas come out. So it's like there's probably a baby stuck. Should I give her some oxytocin to help her give birth? Oh, wait a minute. I don't have oxytocin because I don't have a vet and I don't have any medications. So access to, at the very least, medications, ideally a vet with medications who maybe can give you some so that you're prepared medically for the care of the animal during the farrowing process. The personality of mamas can be variable at best. A sow will change her personality once she has babies on the ground. She can be the sweetest, most docile little thing, but then as soon as she's got babies on the ground, you see a completely different feisty side of her that may be endearing and may be cute. It also may be incredibly scary, because there are times when you need to pick up the babies in order to perform medical care on them, definitely to do castration. Let's not forget about castration. If you're not comfortable doing open surgery and removing the testicles of your male piglets, it's not done with rubber bands like they do with cows. It's not just, oh, we'll put this there and then it'll fall off in a couple of weeks by itself and it'll heal and it'll be fine. No, you're taking piglets, one person's holding them, and you're taking a scalpel, you're making open cuts, popping the nuts out, chop them or pull them off and discard them. And it's not actually a huge deal to do castration, but it took me a while to get over the idea of cutting open an animal that was conscious and did not have any medication. And no, you're not giving sedatives to a piglet, and there's no chemical way to chemically castrate them because that has other effects that are not good for their growth. But you have to come to grips with manhandling and doing things that are somewhat rough to these little cute animals. And I can promise you, in line with that, that their mothers do not think very kindly in your direction when you're picking up their babies and their babies start hollering. So you need to make sure that you're prepared to deal with a sow who sometimes they just kind of come up and they start grunting. Other times they will charge at you like a bear and they mean to take a piece out of you. And I've had to do some pretty substantial jumping escapades and little capers to get out of the way of a pissed off sow when you're trying to yank her baby out of the stall so that you can do the castration. They do not like it, and they remember it after you put the babies back, and they remember it when you pull the babies away to then wean them and separate them. They scold you every time you come back in to feed them afterwards and saying, where are my babies? You took my babies. And they don't forget about it. They're not dumb animals, and they get really pissed and really protective when you're messing with their babies, and you need to be ready to deal with that, because completely different ball of wax after they give birth. It's not an area where you're going to just send your kids in to play with the piglets because, oh, aren't they so cute? Not so fast. Better slow your roll. One of the biggest reasons why people should not be breeding piglets is because they have not done market research on what people are interested in buying in terms of piglets. Now, if you want to raise a bunch of pigs and produce a bunch of pork for yourself just because, then by all means go for it. But one of the things that I see happening here a lot of times in northern New England and New Hampshire, a lot of people will buy Mangalitsa, Kunis, Idaho pasture pigs. And I don't hate on those breeds, but I think it's important to keep in mind their specific uses. And those breeds are not widely accepted. They're not breeds that everybody wants. If you want to get a breed that everybody up here likes, probably a Duroc is going to be the hottest ticket, or maybe a Berkshire. Tamworths go really well. Hamps go well. There's a lot of other ones that all do quite well. But the more lard pig, the Idaho pasture pig, Ossabaw, Mangalitsa, those animals, people don't want them. And there's a lot of people who actively hate them. So when you start breeding these animals and then you turn around and you're all excited because, hey, I got my first litter ready, they're all ready to go and they're for sale now, and you put them on Facebook Marketplace or you put them on Craigslist or you start asking around to different people and you tell them, oh yeah, they're Cooney and Idaho pasture pigs, and then you're waiting for somebody to come take these piglets off your hands and give you the money to make up what you've been spending on feed. You continue to wait and nobody wants to take them off your hands. That is a market mismatch because you thought the Idaho pasture pigs were really cool because they have this sustainability and this small, low cost, high value, homestead pig ethos attached to them based on what you see on YouTube. And they can be all of those things. I'm not saying that they're terrible pigs, but the point is, what do people want to buy in your locality? Because if you're selling an animal that doesn't have a market in your locality, I'm not saying that you can't do it, but I'm saying that you're going to need to be aware that starting off, you're going to have to develop that market in your locality. There's a guy, Kyle Armstrong, up here in New Hampshire, and there's tons of people that he's always fighting with on the Facebook groups because they're shitting on Mangalitas. And he raises Mangalitas. I believe he raises a handful of other breeds that are in that Mangalitsa lard pig. And I say lard pig as for lack of a better term, because lard pigs are not lardy unless you feed them a ton of grain and then they become lardy. But that I'm not trying to get into nomenclature here, so forgive me if you're personally offended by my lack of familiarity with the terminology surrounding mangas and acebas and all of those kind of specialty smaller breed of the homestead pigs. But he does a fantastic job raising those animals, and he has built a market, and his animals are very desirable. But it didn't start off that way. And somebody who just rolls into town and says, okay, I'm going to get some pigs. Yeah, I'll get some Mangalitas. It'll be great. Not so fast. You might want to do a little bit of research before you select a breed like that and figure out, are you going to wind up having a bunch of animals that are coming into your possession? And now, instead of being able to turn them over and sell them and make money for what you put into them, now you're going to have to hold on to them for months and months while you're looking for buyers and trying to trickle them out, because the turnaround time is much longer. And with a lot of those breeds, one of the bigger drawbacks too is that they take longer to finish out, because if you just put the grain to them, instead of growing meat, you put the grain to them and they grow fat. And fat is very desirable depending on what you're trying to do. If you're making lotions, soaps, or lard, great, bring on the fat. Those breeds are going to be fantastic. You put the grain to them, they finish out, you get enough meat, you get a bunch of fat, and you're making money, right? But if you're making money off of meat and not fat specifically, and you have a breed that tends to get fatter, then you're going to have to wait longer for it to get the meat catching up. And it might be 16, 18, 20 months before you're sending that animal to the freezer and you're able to actually cash in on it and make money for all of the time and investment that you had leading up. Market research in your area. Make sure that the animals that you want to breed are going to be animals that are appreciated locally and that there is a substantial market for. If you have a passion for a type of animal that is not represented in your local ag economy, then understand that you're going to have to develop that market and make sure that you have the resources to float yourself through that process, because the animals are not necessarily going to be able to do it all by themselves. You're going to have enough cushion financially and time-wise to be able to support all of that until it catches on. And it can be done, but might want to do that research first either way. Now, I know we've all heard of chicken math, and some of you may have even heard of pig math, which is very similar to chicken math, except it goes like this. Well, you know what? We had 2 pigs last year, and then we got 4. I think we could afford to feed another couple pigs. Why don't we buy a boar and a female? We get a breeding pair, and then next spring, we're going to have all the piglets that we want. We can raise some of them out to sell to our family and our friends, and then maybe the rest of the litter, whatever we're not going to continue raising out, we can sell those. And pig math is a really dangerous thing, because I started with 4 pigs and I wound up with 10 and then 15 and then 20, and it happens real fast. And the problem is, when you buy piglets as piglets, they're little. And then you think, oh, that's cute. They're little. They're not going to take up hardly any space at all. And then after 3 or 4 months, they're half the size of the house, and they can knock down your fence. They can knock down the barn. They can tip over shelters, feeders, waterers, break everything, dig everything up. Now you're stuck with them, and they're a hell of a lot harder to move when they're 200-300 pounds than they are when they're just little and running around with a cute little squeal and they're just little babies. My 9th recommendation of why you should not breed piglets: please do not breed piglets if you have substantial demands on you financially and time-wise and you don't have a lot of bandwidth, because it's like filling up a bowl of cereal. You want to fill a bowl of cereal full enough to where it's worth your time, but not so full that when you pour the milk on it, everything is going to come out of the bowl and spill onto the table, and where you can't put the spoon in it because everything is going to overflow. That's not going to work to your advantage. You want to have enough resources, both time, money, space, medical resources, all the stuff that I've talked about. You want to have enough margin to where your breeding pair can be your focus, and you have margin, you have extra to be able to get it going before there's a demand. And look, you may have a great first go of it. I had a great first go of it. I started off breeding pigs. I didn't start off doing feeders. That as my first effort, it worked out really well because I didn't have major mishaps the first go round. And I built my entire farm around breeding piglets. Everything else that I've been doing in terms of raising pork and growing out and selling larger animals has all been done secondary to the main focus, which is breeding heritage hogs on pasture and for use in a pasture-based environment. And having the bandwidth to be able to focus resources and time on a breeding pair of animals is incredibly important, because if something goes wrong, either the animal is going to be poorly cared for and mistreated, or where you just have to cut and run. And I see it every year on Facebook. And this is a New England thing, because in the fall, people are trying to get rid of animals. They don't want animals over the winter. So everybody is cutting their prices and they're getting out of the game for the winter time, because they thought it would be fun when they bought their breeding pair in the spring. And now they're like, oh shit, I don't want to keep and feed these animals through the winter time. I'm going to have to do a whole lot more work, and it's going to be a big pain in the ass. It's going to be really uncomfortable. And so they are cutting and running. They don't have the resources and the bandwidth to care for these animals throughout an entire year, with the understanding that there's only like maybe 2 or 3 points a year where you're really going to be making money off of these animals, at least from selling piglets, because there's a limited amount of litters that you're going to be able to have. And then there's limited times when you're going to be able to market those litters, because fall piglets go much slower than spring piglets. Spring piglets, if I had 400 spring piglets, I could sell 600 of them. No problem every year. I've gotten to a point where whatever I have in the fall, I can usually sell that number or pretty close, but I don't have a lot of buyers that I'm turning away. It usually works out to be pretty even because there's less demand. People don't want to do that. Leave yourself enough bandwidth to where even if you're not making money, even if it gets cold, even if there's all these other things going on, make sure that you have room to deal with that and negotiate that, so that you can keep these animals responsibly. The news is not all bad. The point of this video is not to discourage you and say that you shouldn't be breeding piglets. The point of this is to say that if I can discourage you in a 20-minute video from breeding pigs, then you probably shouldn't be breeding pigs. My hope is that you've listened to all of these concerns and rationalizations, and these give you points where you can check them off and say, check, that's not a problem. That's not a problem. Oh, that is kind of a problem, but I can fix that problem. So that you get to the point that when you're going into breeding, you're doing it with your eyes open, and you're doing it in a way where you're going to do it ethically. You're going to do it in a way that improves pork on the local scale, that you're not, it's garbage in, garbage out. You don't want garbage genetics that have been cared for and fed garbage that are going to produce garbage animals that are going to be sold, where other people are now going to put this garbage in their freezers. You want to have good animals that are cared for well, that's not having a bad effect on you and your family, and making it so that your family collapses and can't deal with the strain, and your bank account collapses because you didn't have money for all those animals when you thought that they were going to pay you back sooner, but they didn't. All of these things where you take these things in stride, because the big benefit of breeding is not a short-term process. It is a long-term investment. It's a labor of love, and it is a long game. I said the first thing, there's no money in breeding piglets in the short term. It's not a quick dollar that you're making. What breeding your own animals is, it is control over your genetics. It is being able to market your pork or your piglets or whatever it is that you're selling, to be able to market that more effectively, because you're not just selling, I got a male and a female and they had babies and here you go, here's their breeds, good luck. But when you're breeding your own piglets, you can say the mother's line I've had for 4 generations. The father's line I've had for 4 or 5 generations. And here is what I have done to improve and change these generations. I've played with the genetics. And now what I'm selling you is a product that has a tremendous amount of intention and value literally bred right into it. And that's the value that you have. You're not trusting that somebody else was doing that. You are doing that, and you get to control and say, you know what? I want my pigs to have a longer loin and a longer belly. I'm going to bring in this sow from this genetic line over here, and I'm going to cross it with this boar that has really good musculature, nice structure and frame. I'm going to put this ingredient into the mix so that we build a better pig. And the more that you do that, the more control you have over what you're getting. And people care about that. I did a video recently on how you price your pork and how you market farm grown products and meat. And a big part of that is that you're selling the sizzle. You're not selling the steak. It's not just a package of pork chops. People are buying a specialty item from you. And when you have taken ownership of that process all the way back in the lineage of the animals that are now being delivered to your farm as feeder pigs or to the butcher, and then subsequently to your freezer for your high quality pastured pork, the more history you have and the more time you have invested in that, that is more money that you can charge, more value that you are bringing to the customers, and it's worth it in the long run. But this is not something that happens overnight. So my encouragement to you, absolutely get into raising pigs. I started off breeding pigs, not with feeder pigs. I started off with breeders, and I would recommend that you do that if you are interested, but make sure that you can do it gradually and consistently, and that you have the resources to prioritize that operation and plan for all possible contingencies. I'm Stephen Reichert, and I would love for you to subscribe to this channel so that we can make America farmers again and build a culture around producing our own food. I hope to see you guys on the next video. And remember, this whole series is on breeding pigs. I'm going to link everything down below so that you can see the playlist and that you can follow the other videos, but stay subscribed, and we'll be having lots more videos and conversations here on the Rowan Ridge YouTube channel.